reckoning is finally here. No justice, no peace for too many years.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kim Butler-Willis, and I am the Managing Director of Good Stock Consulting. We're a TomTom partner helping to coordinate this dynamic summit. Now, I'm sure that the title of today's session may have been a little jarring. White power? Yep, white power. I personally named this session because I wanted this title to resonate with the gut-punching and provocative nature of racism in America. I don't share it often, but I lost my cousin to Payne Middleton Doctor in the Mother Emanuel massacre of 2015. And that gut punch forced me to make a personal commitment to put my courage over correctness and boldly address racism and inequity in everything I do. I also wanted to leverage the double entendre of the phrase white power. Power and privilege are essential to impacting racism and bias in America. And you know what? Black, Indigenous, and other people of color will need your white power, your white voice, and your white support. Your allyship is critical to the advancement and sustainability of all that we came here to do. So at times, it will be uncomfortable, no doubt. But it's in those uncomfortable moments and feelings that we have to boldly push and unpack to navigate these very complex conversations. So thank you for considering my aggressive title as nothing more than an invitation to be vulnerable in a safe space and an opportunity to foster critical conversation and action with some trustworthy allies. We can't keep fighting without listening. So this is our opportunity to listen and act to balance the fight. Now, after some dialogue, you'll be placed in breakout rooms to harvest our collective energy and passions, and most importantly, to start the work. So I hope that you enjoy your time with us because you are in great hands. Charlene, I'm going to pass it on over to you.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's a great introduction to the reasons why we need to just have ongoing dialogue about issues related to race and ethnicity, social justice, all of those words that we hear often, but we don't often talk enough about it to truly understand what does it mean. Right now in our community here in Charlottesville, we're having all kinds of conversations about equity. What does that really mean? And when you're talking about equity, especially for a lot of the white folks in this community, where does power and privilege and entitlement play into that? And so I always think about a quote from Maya Angelou that makes me think about what explains our actions at that moment, but then what do we need to do to move forward? And it's you do the best you can with what you've got. And when you know better, you do better. And that's not an excuse for some of the things that have happened, especially the tragic, violent ways in which some people have responded to social justice and race and ethnicity and all those ways in which we might identify. But I think it does lend itself to helping us try to wrap our heads around, okay, I was this way at this point, but now I know this information now. So what does that do to my actions at this moment? And then how is that going to impact me as we move forward? So I am joined by two amazing people. One, Forrest, who I just recently got introduced to, but I'm aware of his work. And then Susan Bro, who whose friendship and guidance in a lot of ways, because she comes from an education background. I'm an educator as well, whose relationship I truly appreciate, and I have a lot of admiration for the education and the ways in which she gets people to engage. Susan, would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Forrest to introduce himself, and then we'll get started in some of the questions.
Unmuting myself now. My name is Susan Breaux. On August 12th, 2017, my daughter, Heather Heyer, was killed by a white supremacist who did not like the looks of the crowd that she was with, and he barreled into the crowd, injuring a great many people. My daughter happened to be the one that died. And so suddenly I was given a platform. I didn't do anything to deserve it. I didn't ask for it. I certainly would not have chosen that way to earn a platform by any means, but the platform was handed to me, and I thought, okay, what do I need to do responsibly with this platform? And what I've chosen to do is I've chosen to advocate, learn to be an ally. I don't think a white person can ever call themselves an ally. You have to earn that title, and that has to be designated upon you by other people. But I have continued to try to point people on how to look at the world and think about things in new ways they maybe haven't thought about before. And so I still consider myself an educator. Forrest, how about you?
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everybody. What an honor it is to be with you. I would just emphasize how many other people could be sitting behind a microphone today talking about this issue who know as much or more about it than I do. It's a real honor to be asked. I think one thing you'll see and hear is a difference in the stories and experiences that Susan and I have had and what has brought us to this work, right? And one important thing to note is there's no single portal for entry. There's no single way that one becomes an ally. But what I've learned is that when you're presented with the door as an ally, it's our responsibility to walk through it. And so wherever your door is, you'll hear different journeys today. Mine, for example, starts in a small town in upstate New York. And I mean small. Whatever you're thinking is small, divide that by 2, and then probably divide it by 2 again. The town I grew up in had one traffic light. In one direction, the light blinked yellow, and in the other direction, the light blinked red. There was one brown family in my town, which meant the entire time I was in school, from kindergarten through 12th grade, there was one student, one, in my entire school, my entire upbringing, who was not white. But then I spent the next 24 years of my life in South Carolina. That's where I went to college. It's where I grew up, became an adult, and by the grace of God, I was surrounded the last 20 or so years by some badass Black women who really raised me, with no disrespect to my mom and dad, who did a heck of a job. Those women in South Carolina taught me an awful lot. Taught me an awful lot about how to lean in and how to be a part of difficult conversations. And I've spent most of my life trying to repay all the lessons they paid forward to me. And I hope I can share some of that with you today.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Susan. So I'm Charlene Green. I am the Deputy Director for Piedmont Housing Alliance. I come with 30 plus years, and that dates me so badly, but 30 plus years of doing social justice work, either as an educator, as a coach of athletic teams, as a university professor, as a local government employee, and now in my role as a nonprofit employee working on affordable housing for so many people in our area. And so I've had lots of opportunities to dialogue with lots of different folks, especially white folks, around social justice issues. And I think one of the things that is important in thinking about what we bring to the table are those stories that we don't share enough of. And so I'm going to ask Susan and Forrest to share with us, can you highlight some of those experiences in talking about your journey that made you realize, I need to ask more questions about this, or I need to understand why this is the way it is. And it could be things that have happened when you were younger. It could have been things that happened more recently. But what were those experiences that made you realize this isn't right? Susan, we'll start with you.
Gosh, we lived on 22nd Street in Roanoke when I was little, and it was a poor white neighborhood. Black families began moving in. Most of the white families fled. We stayed for, I guess, a couple years. But I just literally found out this week that was because gentrification had started in Roanoke and the Black families were being forced out. So they moved in where they could find property. And Dad said that some people were playing pranks to get us out. He never has specified what those were. But I remember at 3 years old, having a discussion with the little boy next door, and we both said something rude to each other at one point, as kids will do, and stuck our tongues out, and we were both so fascinated we had the same color tongue. Because both of us had been brought up to believe that even though we were equal as humans, we were different somehow, and for us to discover that we were not different. And yet I saw throughout my life, with segregation, with race riots, with watching videos of people being brutalized strictly for their color, and not really knowing much about history beyond what I could see myself. It was not available to learn in school. Yet I always knew that treatment was different and didn't know what the backgrounds of any of that was. As Heather was literally trying to educate me as she was older, and she would, quote statistics to me. She helped me understand white privilege. I come from a rather poor to low middle class background, and really didn't understand what white privilege was for a long time. So I've continued this journey after she died, knowing I still don't have it right. I made a commitment in 2020 and started in the fall of 2019 studying under strong Black women to get a better understanding, knowing I still lacked a lot. I'm learning history and all sorts of things, and now I'm going, oh, that makes sense. But there was so much that was hidden from us that we didn't even know existed and didn't really care to know growing up. It's just pitiful to think that we cared so little about other human beings. We couldn't step out of our comfort zone enough to look for information.
Yeah,
Forrest, there you go.
Susan, I couldn't agree with you more, right? There's, some intentional withholding of information that the older I get, the more I realize how much that has happened to those of us who are white, frankly, or grew up in certain parts of the country. And I think it emphasizes the lifelong journey of learning we're all on. I will say that my background is in public health. And I think when I really started getting into some of these conversations around equity and justice, most of my public health work, or at least the origins of it, were in South Carolina. And Specifically, I was working on adolescent health and issues like teen pregnancy prevention and early childhood education and looking at high school graduation rates and poverty rates. And I just wasn't willing to accept an answer that said the reason that Black and brown people have worse rates and frankly all of those outcomes is because they're making bad decisions. I just wasn't willing to believe that assumption. And so you start reading, you start thinking, you start learning, you start digging into systems, you start asking questions, right? And you've heard this a lot from our Black and brown friends the last few months, especially as white people, we've got to do our own work. We've got to do our own reading, our own learning, our own thinking, our own exploring. But it's not just about learning, right? Learning helps you understand personally. It might even help you formulate a better Facebook post, right? But we have to also ask why. Why didn't I know these things? Why didn't I ever learn about these things? What is it about the system that prevented me from knowing what happened at 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963, 57 years ago this week, by the way, 2 days ago? Why is it that I just recently started learning about SNCC? Or why didn't I know the history of Juneteenth, right? Why? What is it about the systems? What is it about the areas and the places I grew up that withheld that information? And I don't think it was necessarily bad people per se, but bad systems. Bad systems. Maybe the first time you've ever heard about the Divine Nine was in Kamala Harris's acceptance speech a few weeks ago, right? Look it up. When you don't know something, go find it out. Keep learning, keep asking, keep exploring. And I think that's the part of my journey that excites me, is that I am still learning. And I think the other thing I would say, Charlene, is that as soon as I became really willing to dig into my own past and understand all of the tailwinds that I've had by being born, quite frankly, white, and being born, quite frankly, a male, and being born into the family situation in the neighborhood that I was, the advantages in my life's trajectory that those things have given me, and being willing to say that out loud, right? And being willing to say that out loud, that being a white male in this country puts me at an incredible advantage. And also recognizing that two things can be true at the same time, right? I've worked my butt off. I really think I have to get to some of the places I've been, but I've also been afforded tremendous opportunity. And to really recognize that, yeah, both of those things can be true has changed my journey and has changed the way I think about and interact with other people along the way.
Thank you both for that. Some things that I heard you both say, especially as it relates to asking why things are the way they might be, and why haven't white folks taken advantage of certain things. I also heard you both mention learning from Black folks, especially Black women. And this is always something that comes up, at least in my experience, in engaging folks of color, especially Black people and white people in discussion circles, is white folks wanting Black folks to educate them about their experience. And there are some Black people who are comfortable in that role, but there are a lot of Black folks who will be quick to say, that's not my responsibility. So in thinking about how we're trying to have this conversation about redefining white allyship, what is it that you think white people need to hear from other white people about learning to be to broaden their understanding of what it means to be a human being, what it understands maybe even to be Black or brown?
I think for me, the first thing is to assume you don't have the facts. go find a list. I mean, my gosh, the lists are, it takes you maybe 2 seconds on Google to find a list of recommended reading. Do the reading on your own. If you find someone who's willing to teach you about what you're reading, that's icing on the cake. But at the bare minimum, assume you don't know much. There's a whole world of history out there that has been deliberately hidden from us from elementary school all the way through. And as I told a film crew from England not too long ago, they wanted to talk to Black people in Charlottesville. And I said, they have no reason to trust you. They have no reason to willingly come forth and share their history with you. And sure enough, the people that they wanted to talk to wouldn't talk to them. And you have to understand that our education does not rely on other people holding us up. We have to take personal responsibility for that. But as I've said, if there are people who are willing to teach you, then avail yourself of the opportunity. But pay people for their work. Don't look for free labor. It's emotional, it's exhausting, and very painful for people to have to repeatedly explain, and repeatedly explain what we can find out for ourselves.
Forrest?
Charlene, let me offer 2 thoughts. First of all, Susan, the courage and grace you continue to show, and you and I have only had a handful of conversations, but man, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Let me offer 2 thoughts here that I also think set us up maybe a little bit for the breakout sessions, right? I've been thinking a lot about what would I say if someone said, what does it mean to be an ally, or what do we do in this moment? 2 things that admittedly are going to sound contradictory, but I promise you can do both of them at the same time. The first is I encourage all of us to sort of bring the horizon closer to you, right? Grab your sphere of influence and bring it closer. I think so much of the justice and equity conversations that we're having right now have centered on go out and vote. And we've got a racist in the White House. Like, we need to vote. We need to correct this. We also need to bring the horizon closer to us. We need to understand what's happening up and down the ballot. We need to understand, who's on our city council, county council, what's happening with our school boards, who's controlling the flow of money and power and resources in our community. We need to understand that on average in this country, 82% of our state legislatures are white. 82% on average, right? We need to bring the sphere a little closer, because I think we can shortchange ourselves as allies if we say, yes, I'm ready to be an ally and I'm ready to go vote in November. Well, that's a good start, right? But bring this conversation closer. And I'm challenged a lot by the fact that, people know Daniel Cameron's name, for example, but might not know who their local district attorney is or who their state's attorney general is. Daniel Cameron, by the way, in case you're wondering, is the attorney general in Kentucky that still has not charged the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. But we know his name because he's on the news, but we don't know enough about our local folks that have so much influence and so much power. So the first thing I often say is bring the horizon closer. Know what you can do in your sphere, at your place of work, in your community, on your street. And then the second thing, and again, I said this sounds contradictory, but we can do both at the same time. As we're bringing the horizon closer to us, we also need to think bigger. We need to think about the word power that's in the introduction to this session. We need to think about resources. We need to think about redistribution, frankly, of power and resources. We need to think about how schools are funded, housing practices. Susan mentioned gentrification and redlining earlier. We need to think about philanthropy and who's giving money and who they're giving it to. How are we hiring people in our places of work? We need to recognize that, in the last 2 years, 81% of vacant Fortune 500 board seats have been filled by white people. 81% of vacant Fortune 500 board seats over the last 2 years have been filled by white folks. We need to think bigger, think about systems, think about how we can, in our sphere, start to redistribute resources and power. And frankly, to Kim's point about the introduction to this session, if you're sitting on boards, if you're sitting in a place where you're hiring people, if you're sitting in a place that you can use it, use your power. Use it and understand how we can start to change these conversations. But I think in think bigger, I mean, yes, we need to march and we need to do what else? Yes, we need to protest and we need to think bigger. So I'm sorry, Charlene, I get going here, but those two things for me are critically important. Bring the horizon closer to you. Let's make this conversation hyper local. And also let's start to think a little bigger, changing systems, redistribution of power and resources.
And sometimes it's the elephant in the room. I mean, people are aware, and you may only have to say, gee, it's awfully white in here to start the conversation rolling. You don't have to, have a speech prepared when you go into the school board or whatever. But if you just look around and point out that doesn't necessarily represent the population, that can make a big difference right there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we're realizing, especially in a session that has a title that could be a course, whether it's a college course, a high school course, but an ongoing opportunity to talk about this, because we're not at this place by accident. There's some very deliberate things that have put us in this position where we are still having the conversation about power and privilege and racism, all these things that you need to have some conversations with some very important people to see what does that mean for you. And so I'm going to give you one question as we break out for you all to focus on. And after I give you the question, Ben, I don't know if it's you or Alex that are going to give folks direction about how you want to collect the information they discuss. But I want you all to have a discussion in your breakout about how do you want to redefine white allyship? Or is it always going to be in the way that you think about it? And then we're going to come back and hear from a few folks about what you all discussed. But how are you defining white allyship? Okay, thank you so much for. I hope you had some great discussion in your chat. It's always hard when you throw out great questions, the great prompts, and then you have to snatch people back for this piece. So it's real important to make sure you include your comments in the chat and make sure you fill out the survey. Is there anything else they need to do, Ben? I want to make sure that we capture as much as possible.
For sure. I know we had an assigned reporter for each group, and if you're comfortable, we have about 3 or 4 minutes here. If anyone wants to, either put that in the chat, or if you'd like to hop on a video and share a quick thought, if you wouldn't mind keeping it short, because we'd like to hear from a couple folks, but that would be wonderful.
Yeah, about 30 seconds if you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone?
They said they needed 60 more minutes to chat.
Right. I know.
Yeah, I think we had a great discussion. We didn't realize the time was going to be constrained, but some of the things that we did talk about was retooling the way or rethinking how we fund different things. For instance, education. We know that schools are funded by property taxes within communities. Mm-hmm. Well, if home ownership is being crippled over the years through systemic racism, right, then our children and their children's children are going to be already starting out life with the crutch. And so so that's one. And then retooling the different things, like we talked about SAT and entry into schools and colleges.
Yeah.
And what it means to be eligible for a certain job. And then also, looking at home ownership, how do we, allocate resources to build up equity in that? Because we know that's that's ways that you pass on wealth onto future generations. And right now we're just not having that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ebony.
Okay.
Is there one more person who wants to share out quickly?
I'll go.
Go ahead, Keisha.
So in our group, we talked about defining allyship and defining what we can and cannot do, and then being willing to put in the work. We talked about taking it, looking at what our jobs are and making sure that we're talking to our leadership team and looking at, you know, any actions we take as a civil rights and human rights work, not, you know, something that will jeopardize our employment, but understanding we still have a voice. And then we ended with, you know, talking about being willing to do the work. And so we got carried away talking about books, and then the time ended. But we were very passionate about, you know, what is allyship?
Yeah, that's a great comments from both of you. Bill, you had your hand up. I'm going to let you be the last one to share.
All right, group two, just real quickly, we actually spent a lot of our time talking that what Forrest brought up. He brought up the aspect of bringing it more personal from a political point of view, but we got into being more intentional to build community, quote unquote, allyship with our spheres of influence. So family, church, work, neighborhood, etc. And that is something you can do every day, very intentional about. We actually got into a discussion over how hard that is to do often in church, because like we all know, church is the most segregated place in the country on Sunday mornings, and some personal sharings on shallow starts of churches trying to figure out how to deal with their embedded segregational approaches and struggling themselves on how to really build allyship, something beyond comfortable conversations.
Thank you. So, you know, again, we recognize how constricted we were with the time. And so here's my challenge. Here's our challenge. Let's say we bring you all back in you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months to see how you may have taken one of the ideas that you all discussed and tried to put it into practice. If you think about the personal stuff that you need to work on, what more do you need to learn about others that you don't know anything about? And then how do you put that into practice with where you work or worship or any of those places? Why don't we bring you all back and see how you've advanced the conversation, or how you've, to go back to Maya Angelou, you do the best you can with what you know, and when you know better, you do better. So we're going to end this with Susan and then Forrest, if you could take us home with each of you taking about a minute.
Susan, you're on mute.
Susan, you're on mute.
Got it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, sorry, I had a message and I couldn't get to my mic. So think about every little step you take in the right direction as a pebble. Not only are we all going to be throwing pebbles into the water at the same direction, the same intent, the same purpose, but you yourself are throwing an accumulation of pebbles. Every action you take is a pebble. And if you get enough pebbles together, they make a ripple, and the ripple makes a wave. And we need that tsunami of wave to happen. But it starts with the ripples. Make the ripples.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody and re-emphasize the idea of reconvening, and also re-emphasize the idea of us curating all these ideas you've had and being able to share them back with you. So take the survey, right? But as we wrap up, and I've been thinking about this in the context of justice, right? And we mentioned words like equity and social justice and all of that a lot. And sometimes we, again, think micro, and we talk about justice for George Floyd, and justice for Breonna Taylor, and justice for Ahmaud Arbery, and justice for Daniel Prude, Pro tip, white allies, say their names every chance you get. We talk about justice at that level, but we can also redefine justice in this conversation. I'll leave you with two quotes. Martin Luther King said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." More recently, Brian Stevenson reminds us that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. We've got work to do, but I know from your commitment to this session and the ideas you've generated that you're ready to do the work, and I look forward to standing alongside each of you.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're at about time. We want to be respectful to everyone's schedules. I saw Shirley Paul just said, why wait till 2021 for that next convening? So, hey, we're here for it. And thank you, Susan, Charlene, Forrest, for leading us in this conversation today. I couldn't imagine better people to do it. And I hope you'll join us again when it is the time to reconvene. I'm going to put this poll in the chat once more. We'll put on some nice hold music if y'all want to hang out for a moment with us and fill that out. We'd love to capture everyone's ideas and then give it back. And maybe you'll see something in there that you hadn't thought of or hadn't brainstormed with your group today. So thank you all for being here. We got 6 more weeks of wonderful events and conversations coming up. So we'll hope you'll join us for those as well. And thank you again.
Thank you all.
The day of reckoning is finally here. No justice, no peace for too many years. We're marching for equality in every state, choosing love over violence, brutality, and hate. We're gonna stand.